Today I'm sharing my thoughts on my YouTube subscriber Laura Mason's question regarding Protestant martyr Anne Askew and Queen Catherine Parr. Laura asked, would Anne Askew's life have been spared if she'd only given Catherine Parr's name? And if she did, what would have been Catherine's fate? Henry did protect Catherine when others were trying to arrest her for heresy, and would this have been a tipping point? Thank you, Laura, for an excellent question on the plot against Catherine in 1546, the year that Anne Askew was burnt at the stake for heresy. Before I answer Laura's question, let me first explain who Anne Askew was, how she was connected with Queen Catherine Parr, Henry's sixth wife, and what happened to both Anne and Catherine. Anne Askew was born in Lincolnshire around 1520 and was the daughter of Sir William Askew. She was well educated and was apparently influenced in her faith by her brothers, who were students at Cambridge and who spoke of the new religious ideas when they were home from university. But it was during the Pilgrimage of Grace rebellion in 1536 that Anne really turned her back on the Catholic faith, as the Catholic rebels attacked her home and seized her brothers. And then Anne was forced into marrying a conservative Catholic, Thomas Kyme. But fortunately, she was able to spend time with her sister, who'd married a man who supported religious reform. In 1541, Henry VIII had issued an injunction ordering the Great Bible, the first authorised Bible in English, to be available in every parish church in the kingdom. And Protestants like Anne took advantage of this, reading it for themselves and holding Bible readings. Unfortunately, just 2 years later, more legislation was passed, this time preventing all women and men below the rank of gentlemen from reading the Bible. However, Anne, like many others, had learnt parts of scripture by heart, so she shared her views and preached to those who were deprived from reading the Bible. Anne's husband wasn't happy with this. He kicked her out of the family home and Anne petitioned for divorce. When she was refused by her local court, she travelled to the City of London, believing that the king who had broken with Rome would find in her favour. While Anne was in the capital, she mixed with other Protestants and met famous Protestant reformers like Hugh Latimer, Bishop of Worcester, Nicholas Shaxton, Bishop of Salisbury, and Dr. Edward Crewe, men who also knew Queen Catherine Parr, the woman who'd married Henry VIII in 1543 and who was of the Protestant persuasion. And she also met Catherine Brandon, Duchess of Suffolk, a friend of the Queen's and an influential Protestant in her own right. Anne Askew set about preaching in London, becoming known as the Fair Gospeller. But she was making enemies. Catholic conservatives like Stephen Gardiner, Bishop of Winchester, who served Henry VIII as his secretary. Stephen Gardiner was unhappy with Anne Askew's actions in London, but he was unhappier still with the Protestant circle that appeared to be forming around the new Queen, and the influence that this Queen consort could yield. Could Gardiner kill two birds with one stone? Could he use Anne Askew to get rid of Catherine Parr and be rid of Askew too? He thought so. In 1545, Anne Askew and several other Protestant sympathisers were arrested for heresy. However, they had to be released due to a lack of evidence and witnesses. But in 1546, Anne unwittingly played into Gardiner's hands when her petition for divorce was dismissed. She was ordered to return to her husband, but refused the court's order. She ended up being brought before Gardiner to explain herself. A golden opportunity for the bishop and his colleagues to interrogate her on other matters. The courageous Anne denied the sacrament of the altar, something that was heresy. She was tried for heresy at London's Guildhall in June 1546 with several other Protestants and was found guilty and condemned to death, to be burnt at the stake. But the authorities hadn't finished with her. Gardiner and his cronies wanted her to implicate the Queen in her heresy. Anne was taken to the Tower of London, where Sir Richard Rich and Thomas Risley ordered her to be tortured, to be racked. Anne had already been condemned, and she was a gentlewoman, so it was illegal for her to be racked. And Sir Anthony Kingston, the lieutenant of the Tower of London, soon stopped the torture and left the Tower to report what was going on to the king and to seek his pardon for his illegal and appalling actions. But Rich and Risley were determined to get Anne to name names, to implicate the women close to the Queen, like the Duchess of Suffolk, the Countess of Hertford, the Countess of Sussex, Lady Denny, and the Queen herself. The two men turned the rack themselves until a frantic Kingston put a stop to it, informing them that the king had ordered for Anne to be taken off the rack and returned to the cell. Anne had been racked so badly that at her execution on the 16th of July 1546, she had to be carried to the stake on a chair. And the stake was equipped with a seat to hold her up as she burnt to death. But despite her torture, Anne had not parted with any names. But was Queen Catherine Parr in any danger in 1546? Well, it's hard to know for sure. The king had tired of his wife's religious views, which he shared enthusiastically with him. And so Gardiner was able to obtain the king's consent for Catherine's arrest. But while Gardiner was putting everything in place for Catherine to be arrested, according to martyrologist John Fox, the king shared with his physician, Dr. Thomas Wendy, details of the plot against his wife, telling him that he must swear to keep it secret. Then, a member of the Queen's household discovered a shocking document, the Bill of Articles that had been drawn up against the Queen and signed by the king himself. Catherine was informed and quickly became hysterical, which is little wonder if you think that two of her predecessors had been executed. On hearing that his wife was ill, almost to the peril and danger of her life, the king sent Dr. Wendy to tend to her. Wendy, who had served the Queen in the past and was close to her, was able to tell her exactly what was happening, the information that the king had shared with him, and he advised her to conform herself unto the king's mind and show her humble submission unto him, telling her that if she did so, he was sure that she should find him gracious and favourable unto her. Fox goes on to say that Catherine continued to be in such a dangerous state that the king decided to visit her and was able to calm her somewhat with his sweet and comfortable words. After she'd calmed down properly, Catherine ordered her ladies to get rid of any heretical books that might put them in danger. Then, the following evening, she sought out the king, who was with a group of gentlemen. The king began to speak of religion, asking his wife her opinion. There was no way that Catherine was going to implicate herself further, and instead of being drawn into a debate, Catherine told the king that she thought it very unseemly and preposterous for the woman to take upon her the office of an instructor or teacher to her lord and husband, but rather to learn of her husband and to be taught by him. When the king tried to draw her further, she stated that she'd only debated religion with the king to learn from him and also to take the king's mind off the pain he suffered from his leg. The king was happy with her replies, calling her sweetheart, telling her that they were perfect friends again, and embracing her and kissing her. When Risley and 40 guards attempted to arrest Catherine the following day, the king called his Lord Chancellor an arrant knave, beast and fool. The king had changed his mind, and Catherine was safe. Unlike Queens Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, and men like Thomas Cromwell, Catherine Parr had been given the opportunity to save herself by seeing the king. She was able to save herself from arrest and potential execution by explaining herself to her husband and submitting to him. The king gave her that chance by sending Dr. Wendy to her, by perhaps allowing a document to be seen by her household, and by visiting her and then allowing her into his presence. Was he manipulating both Catherine and the Catholic conservatives? Historian Elizabeth Norton thinks so. She writes, by manipulating both the conservative faction at court and Catherine herself, Henry was able to achieve his ends. He demonstrated to Risley, Gardiner and other members of his court that it was his will that was supreme. He also put Catherine firmly in her place, and she never attempted to assert herself politically again during Henry's reign. Catherine Parr had no desire to be a martyr, and she was content to wait until the reign of her stepson, Edward VI, in order to publish her great reformist work, The Lamentation of a Sinner, and to once again begin the promotion of her religious beliefs. I agree. By not telling Risley that he'd reconciled with Catherine and that he wanted her arrest cancelled, Henry VIII had managed to completely humiliate the man. But what would have happened if Anne Askew had talked during her racking? What if she'd given the Queen's name? Well, I don't believe it would have saved Anne. She'd already confessed her faith and been condemned to death for heresy. She wasn't being offered mercy in return for information. She just could have saved herself some extra suffering. And even though it would certainly have given Gardiner, Risley and the gang ammunition against the Queen, I think the king still could have given Catherine the opportunity to save herself. He knew full well that she was a Protestant. She debated with him regularly, and I think he would have used the situation in the same way. My council has found evidence against you, but what do you say? And Catherine could have grovelled and been put in her place again. However, Anne Askew's information could well have brought about the falls of members of the Queen's inner circle. I don't think any of her women would have been executed due to their status and the positions of their husbands, etc., but I can see them being punished by being separated from their queen and friend and losing their positions at court. I think the tipping point for Henry VIII would have been if Catherine had been more like Anne Askew, if she'd been martyr material, if she'd stated that she was sharing her faith with the king to save his soul, for example. A strong and outspoken Catherine would certainly have been arrested and potentially executed for heresy. And the Catholic conservatives would have had the upper hand at court. Any Protestants at court would surely have kept their faith to themselves after that. But what do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this question. And thank you again to Laura for such an excellent question. I'll see you soon.